All right. Well, hey there, AP Government students. Sorry I can't be with you in person today. I've got this annoying cough that's been sticking around and some other COVID symptoms. And so I'm waiting for test results to come back. Hopefully they're negative and I'll be back with you soon. But until I find out, I am just out of an abundance of caution going to delay my return from winter break. But I don't want that to get in the way of you learning about public opinion and political socialization. So I'm going to introduce that to you today. We're going to talk some about public opinion and polling today. And so we will get into that just a little bit. Hope you enjoy the memes on the first slide here. Political socialization getting very patriotic here. So let's talk first about public opinion. When we talk about public opinion, we're just talking about how people feel about things. How do people feel about the way government is being run? There's a few ways that we measure public opinion. The one that we will spend most of our time talking about is polling, just taking a survey of people and seeing what their opinions are. You'll hear people sometimes say, oh, a majority of Americans think we should adopt such and such policy. That is kind of an appeal to this idea of a majoritarian model, the idea that governments should do what a majority of Americans want it to do. You'll hear this often when people say things like, oh, a majority of Americans believe in certain gun control laws, or a majority of Americans want the government to tax this way. This is an appeal to this majoritarian model. We've talked about the difference between these two models before, majoritarian and pluralist. So this is just a reminder. Majoritarian is the idea that we should do what a majority wants. Pluralist model is the idea that government is influenced by many small competing groups, these sort of coalitions of different interest groups, where you may have groups that are maybe don't represent a majority of the United States, but are kind of loud and well funded, and are able to kind of set the agenda. I've talked before about the NRA, the National Rifle Association. They by no means represent a majority of the United States, but they are a powerful, well funded interest group. They've been able to very effectively set the tone for discussion about gun control over the past 30 years or so, despite being a minority of the country. So that would be an example of sort of pluralist democracy, these small competing coalitions with sort of outsized influence. All right, so like I said, when we're measuring public opinion, the most common tool that we will use are polls. Think about this as a survey. So, very simple. We ask people questions about their opinions, and then we measure their responses and publish those results. And that is supposed to give us an idea of um, how the public feels about a topic. We might do these sort of topical polls where we're trying to find out how people feel about an issue, gun control, climate change, taxation, infrastructure, things like that. Or we might do election polls. So the midterm elections are coming up this year, 2022, in November, where we will vote for all 435 members of the House, about a third of the Senate. And so election polls can give us an idea ahead of time of which party seems to be well positioned to win in those elections. Um, as far as other types of polls, um, candidates will often do benchmark polls when they are first starting a campaign. It kind of gives the candidate an idea of their starting position. So if I was going to run for Senate in Virginia, the first thing to do would be to take a benchmark poll and see whether people have a positive or negative feeling about me. And if I were to do that, overwhelmingly what I would probably get is that most people would have no idea who I am. So for most benchmark polls, the main information that it gives you is, okay, how many people have positive or negative feelings about me, and how many people do I need to just introduce myself to? Because name recognition is such a huge part of winning elections. Uh, Tracking polls ask people the same questions over time. So, this is a very common thing to do with presidential approval ratings. You may have heard over the past few months about President Biden's approval ratings going down. That's common for presidents, for their approval rating to start at a high point and then kind of find some middle ground where it kind of settles on. And so, tracking polls help us see things like how people feel about an issue or about an elected official over time. So we're asking people the same questions over time. Random polls, everyone has the same equal chance of being selected. And most often, this is accomplished by random digit dialing. Random polls are better than this next type, a straw poll. A straw poll is where people seek out the poll. People have to volunteer to do it. So let's say you're watching CNN and they say, oh, we want to hear from you about this issue. Go to CNN.com and take our poll about this. That would be a straw poll. Straw polls tend to be a lot less representative. They tend not to be as accurate as random polls because only people who feel strongly about the issue are actually going to take the time and put in the energy to seek out the poll. These random digit dialing polls are much more accurate than straw polls because you're catching people who aren't so politically motivated, and that makes up actually a majority of the voters. So random polls are way better than straw polls. Exit polls happen immediately after an election. Typically, as you're leaving a polling place, there may be someone there with a clipboard who says, hey, can I ask you some questions? And those polls aren't just asking who you voted for, right? Because we're going to find that out from the results of the election. But they tend to ask demographic information and they tend to ask issue related information. If we're just looking at the results of a presidential election, we'll know who won by which candidate got more votes, but we may not know why a particular candidate got more votes. What issues were more important to people? What types of voters voted certain ways? What demographic groups voted for particular candidates? Exit polls help us break down that information. They are not always super helpful for determining who's going to win an election. You want to be careful of using exit polls to help predict results. Typically, there are exit polls that come later after an election that are much more accurate. And so you want to take a look at those. And that's going to actually be part of the activity you're going to do today. And then you get these weird things called push polls. Push polls have questions that are designed to change the voter's opinion. They're not so much designed to be an accurate measure of public opinion. They're actually designed to be a persuasive tool. They are a persuasive tool disguised as a poll. So to give you an example, I got a call from one of these push polls one time that was against the Democratic Party. It was an anti-democratic organization. And so the questions would be things like, do you support Democrat Nancy Pelosi's socialist communist agenda, or would you rather have freedom? You know, really obvious things like that, where the question itself was designed to nudge my opinion in a particular direction. So push polls are not so much designed to be accurate. They are designed to actually change the opinion of the person who's taking the poll. And we'll talk about why that's a problem and what to kind of look for in a decent poll. That'll be on the next slide. If you're ever looking at polls, it's good to look at trends over time. You don't just want to take one poll out of context. Having more data is always helpful and seeing how things have changed over time. So, for example, in the Virginia governor race last year, 2021, in the spring, Democrat Terry McAuliffe was leading pretty handily, but the trend over time moved in the direction of the Republican Glenn Youngkin. And so by the time the election day was rolling around, the race seemed tied or maybe giving Youngkin a slight edge, and the trend was moving in Youngkin's direction. And indeed, we saw Youngkin win. Excuse me, I'm sorry for the coughing that's going to happen during this video. Um, and you'll also want to keep an eye out for what's called margin of error. When you're looking at a poll, you will see margin of error expressed as plus or minus a certain number. So let's say you were looking back at one of those governor polls and you saw McAuliffe with 48% and Youngkin with 47% and other being, math, whatever's left, 5%. The margin of error might be plus or minus 3, which means those numbers, 48, 47, and 5, might be off by as much as 3%. So even though in the poll itself, McAuliffe is in the lead, it's within what's called the margin of error. Youngkin's number might be as much as 3 points higher. McAuliffe's might be as much as 3 points lower, and that would actually put Youngkin in the lead. So if you see a poll that's very close, we'll say it's within the margin of error, meaning it could kind of go either way. This website, 538.com, is a good website for taking a look at political polls, and they do a good job of putting polls together, kind of analyzing them, giving more information about them over time. So if you want to find a good poll, there's a few things that you want. Number one, you want the pollster to be nonpartisan. Parties and campaigns will also conduct polls. You should be skeptical of any poll coming from a campaign. If it comes from a campaign, they're going to try to make themselves look better, and their methodology is probably a little bit suspect. So you want the pollster to be nonpartisan. You want a large, random, representative sample. If I were to poll your class and ask them, which Avenger is the strongest, and then I were to try to map those results onto the entire state of Virginia, that runs into all kinds of problems. The sample is relatively small compared to the state. It's not random. You're all in the same geographical area. You're in the same age range. And the sample is not representative, meaning our classroom doesn't have the same demographic breakdowns as the rest of the state. So we want a large, random, representative sample. A sample size of about 1,000 is typically large enough. And pollsters have to jump through all kinds of hoops to make sure that it's representative. They need to get enough people in enough different demographic categories to make sure that they can have a sample that looks like the population they're trying to apply it to. Questions need to be clear and unbiased. They shouldn't be confusing, and it shouldn't be a push poll like that one I mentioned before. We need to make sure that we're not trying to nudge with our wording. We're not trying to nudge our sample in one direction or another. You want a low margin of error. Typically plus or minus 3 is fine. Anything above that, you're starting to get too high. And I put some reliable pollsters here too. Gallup, Pew, Ann Selzer in Iowa is well known for her accurate polls of the Iowa caucuses. Monmouth, YouGov, the New York Times works with Siena College. They have a good polling department. Fox News pollsters are considered to be kind of among the best. So one thing that's important to remember is that polls don't help you if you don't understand math. This was the forecast from 538.com ahead of the 2016 presidency. They had kind of put all the polls together and created a forecast of who was more likely to win, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. Many people saw this forecast and thought, oh, Hillary Clinton is at a 67% chance of winning. That means she's definitely going to win. Of course, things that only have a 33% chance of happening sometimes do in fact happen. So it's worth remembering that polls can be off. And we'll talk in just a moment about some issues that polls have faced. All right, so some polling challenges. Polls used to rely heavily on landline phones. Of course, that's a real problem because a lot of people are moving away from landline phone use. So that random digit dialing becomes more challenging when you're trying to deal with cell phones. So people moving away from landlines has presented a problem for polls. Um, Online polls present their own challenges. You have to make sure that people don't just spam the results. So you have to find a way to make sure that people can only take the poll once. You also need to figure out how to reach the population that you want. So if you want your poll to go out to only Virginians, how are you going to do that online? Make sure that people from outside of the state can't take that poll. Same thing with cell phones, because people don't always have the area code that matches where they live. I don't have a 757 area code, even though this is where I live. So um, those kinds of geographic challenges have made it difficult to make polling more accurate. And the third one, just a declining trust in social institutions. Um, One of the things that we found is that people without college degrees are less likely to take polls. And that has made getting those demographic groups to represented in polls very difficult. That has been a key demographic in both the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections that has made polling very difficult. It's made predicting the results very difficult. And so trying to figure out how to reach people who inherently don't trust these institutions, that's a huge challenge for polling moving forward, because um, if people don't trust polling, don't trust the institutions, think that it's all rigged, fake news, then they're not going to engage with it, and that's going to make it inaccurate. So it's kind of a vicious cycle there. So that's good for public opinion. We'll pick up there next time. Hopefully, I will be here next time to talk to you about political socialization. I'm going to call it there and rest my voice a little bit. And you've got a polling activity on Schoology to complete. And of course, you can always go ahead with your um, reading notes, or you can spend this time reviewing must knows, because we'll do a quiz on must knows 1 through 90 next time. Hopefully, I'll see you soon with good negative results from my COVID test. And I hope you all enjoyed your break very much.